against it, I think it's time we talk about T1 because they have a lot going on for them, and I just need to talk about them. I mean, I had them around 3rd to 5th, like as the best, strongest team in the world from about the end of the LCK regular season to about now, and they never really dropped out of that range or climbed above it. So first, I'll just say, like, I apologize for underestimating you, T1, but at the same time, if you predicted T1 to make finals pre-quarters with that draw, I hate to say it, but you're a delusional T1 fan. Thank you for your service. Pre-quarters, T1 had a lot of issues, particularly with the draft, early game, even against teams like TL, they had some serious issues early game, and their team fighting wasn't reliable enough to predict them to beat like a JDG, Genji, or even an LNG and BLG when they were in form. And so I was just unable to like really see them doing anything better. I was unable to watch both their quarters and semis series live, and so when I saw the score, I just sort of assumed that their opponents had inted and that they'd taken advantage of, because one of the things this roster's always been good at is just capitalizing on their opponent's mistakes, and so I sort of assumed that had been what had happened, but that's not. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it down. This is going to be quite a long video because I'm talking about 2 different series, but hopefully you'll enjoy, hopefully you will develop a bit of an understanding, and hopefully this will provoke some discussion about T1. So in the LNG series, T1 showed that they'd fixed a lot of the player problems. For example, their drafting had massively improved even from like the Swiss stage. From like, for example, in game 1, they saved the draft with the Neela center pickup, and then in game 3, they were also able to pick up a very, very solid draft. They did make some mistakes, like due to their unwillingness to rotate the rail, which would have allowed them to take advantage of the bad Gwen pick from LNG, and although they got like the double ADC bot lane, which is like a key part of their identity. And then in game 3, they also had this like weird draft order, keeping the flex Poppy when they already had seen both the lanes that she could play into, not allowing them to pick up like an ADC counter pick to strengthen their bot lane. But they still did a really good job in the draft. Like, one thing that T1 really identified with their draft, relative to like previous series, was their need to have a push at level 2 in the bot lane, have push at level 2 in the bot lane if they wanted to win, and they got that frequently. They did make some silly mistakes, like their macro decision of taking a dodgy 4th Drake fight instead of a 3 Baron, and I think that was game 1, but it worked out because Tarzan sold out in the Smite fight, and then they easily took the fight, and they would have won anyway. They would have won that fight anyway. Also, their response to LNG's early dive in game 3 was way too overcommittal, and it didn't really get anything back. But like ultimately, those sort of mistakes didn't matter. So now we're going to get onto some of their like better stuff. Like, sure, LNG had like problems, like Tarzan was playing horrifically, which sort of neutered Zika and Scout. But like in game 1, Faker bullied Scout in lane, and Zeus got a solo kill on Zika. Game 2, Tarzan showed him vision, which then helped T1 compound their advantage in the bot lane, as T1 were just instantly committed to a play that worked out. T1 did, like, throughout the series, take advantage of every single mistake that LNG made, especially from Tarzan. I mean, in general, the top side was so in favor of T1 that it was crazy. And it wasn't all just Tarzan struggling under pressure either. Like, it was really good play from them as well. Like, additionally, Guma had one of his best games all year. I mean, in game 3, he even styled on Gala with his knowledge of champion damage in the lane phase. Another thing that you have to sort of praise T1 for, though, in this series is that they had really fixed their early game. And I think that came from the greater stability in the bot lane, with changes that they made to the into the type of lane that they looked for in the draft, which allowed their top side to play with a lot more freedom, whilst on the other side, Zika was like forced to sack his lane in order to save his ADC, and that's just like not what your top lane wants to be doing. I mean, after this series though, whilst T1 had cleaned up a lot, it was still really hard to tell like just how much of that was LNG selling the series and how much was them like stepping up. So whilst they looked like really good, it was still a case of them being an underdog, I think, going into the game against JDG, but it was definitely not looking like it was going to be a 3-0, which would have been my prediction pre-watching the LNG series. Especially with the players like Faker, Zeus, and even Guma stepping up, where they've been lacking at times earlier in the year and even earlier in the tournament. Like, it showed a vast improvement to a degree where it almost annoyed me that they've been so bad at improving throughout this roster's history prior to it. And then coming into the JDG series, there was so much to say in favor of T1 and JDG. Like, I still favored JDG, but like the meta was shifting to T1 and the games were in Korea, but JDG also hadn't lost a BL5 all year coming into the series, and it would come down to like what league T1 could get into before the team fights, because JDG were and I still think are the best team fighting team in the world. But in the draft, T1 continued to look good at winning 3 of the 4 drafts, in my opinion. I mean, in game 1, they capitalized on JDG letting through the Ori. There were some oddities in game 1 as well. I mean, JDG sort of counterpicked themselves with the Xayah, which opened the door for Guma's Varus, and they actually T1 actually compounded this issue by going with the Jhin instead, because the main counter into the Xayah is by picking range. Everyone expected them to pick Varus, which is why he's still in my notes here. The Jhin was even better, I think, in that situation. I mean, in game 2, JDG tried to pick away the Ori, but in return, T1 got their Caitlyn and Ashe bot lane, alongside their coveted Aatrox, so I think the draft advantage was still for T1. And it was also compounded by the sort of out-of-sync draft from JDG, with the Vi trying to pick away again with the Kalista. I mean, in game 3, JDG finally banned the Orianna, but like T1 adapted with the Kalista pick, whilst JDG responded with the Varus and Ashe, which left T1 with like a decent number of options in the bot lane. I mean, JDG did try to limit those options with like the Wukong to deny the double ADC, but additionally T1 were able to get their Aatrox again, and this time it was into like a 3 crocodile snack, so, you know, quite easy for them. I mean, in game 4, I mean, JDG just went too ballsy with, so T1 just sort of won the draft by sticking to something a lot more standard, which is sort of what you'd expect really from T1 at this point. They've just realised I've been hiding behind like my mic from the camera all this time. I'm sorry guys, my bad. It's really annoying as well, because if I sit up straight like this, like it looks fine, but as soon as I slump down even a little bit, which I do when I'm reading my notes, it looks awful. I'm sorry guys, I'm sorry, that's my bad. I mean, one thing you have to say about this JDG series is that the early game was going to be critical, and in game 1 T1 were able to get first blood, and then Zeus like snowballed it with a solo kill aided by the Comet, which was a really nice use of his runes. I mean, in game 2 T1 also won the level 1, not only going for 2 for 1, but also Kanavi started with a Q, which lost him a lot of tempo, but the level 3 bot gank did sort of undo a lot of that damage, but it was still a good early start from T1. I mean, in game 3 Kanavi executed the level 1 shenanigans with really well, denying the little chickens, but missing then into the dive, making the fight go 2 for 1 in favor of T1. So like it wasn't that bad. And also JDG's Aatrox response just did not work in that game, so I think that's also a big deal. Zeus was able to solo force out 369's flash, which forced Wukong to shepherd top much more than he would have liked to. So that was sort of how the early game was really worked for T1. It like worked a lot better. And the mid game as well, T1s were relatively solid. I mean, in game 1, they basically won the game at second Drake when JDG like overcommitted and then made a tilt play, and T1 just punished both the mistakes. Like it was so simple from them. It was really nice. In game 2, the 12-minute fight was quality from T1 as well, as they caught out JDG. But Ruler's movement and in general JDG's kiting was so good that they just showed that why I still think they are probably the best team in the world, despite losing this series. Maybe, I don't know, it's a bit more out there than it was before the series. I think before the series they definitely were the best team. Now, who knows? But their general kiting was just so good that it turned what would have been an insane play from T1 into like a 1-for-1. Again, they had good setup at the third Drake, but JDG turned on them so well, and there was nothing they could do to really win the second game from then on. Game 2, the 31-minute fight, Kanavi inted, and T1 did really well to punish him, but like the Seneca Sante was just so strong. It was such a strong duo. T1 did get first movement to 5th Drake as well in that game, but JDG sort of just punished them even without vision, which just sort of cancelled out that advantage. And then, like another thing that I really want to highlight from them is like in game 3, Faker's massive engage at 30 minutes to end the game. I think that's genuinely like one of the best plays he's made in years. They did have I think they had a few more mistakes in this game than they did in this series than they did against LNG. So I'm not sure whether this is like truly counts as a mistake, but like despite JGG being so far behind, like they showcased in game 1, they showcased that they were the much better team in team fighting, which is not like an endorsement of JDG really, because you can never really endorse a team that is that far behind. It's almost more of an indictment of T1's gameplay. Like they took fights in the worst possible places and made some mistakes, but like they still won overall, so I guess it doesn't really matter all that much. It's just something that's worth highlighting when you're talking about this series and the 2 gate teams. In game 3 as well, I think T1 made more mistakes than they had throughout like the rest of the series and like the previous series. Faker was too hesitant in a dive, Guma was irrelevant until the insane relo engaged from Ona for Drake, and then they sort of overextended horrifically at the 20-minute Baron, or after the 20-minute Baron. But they won the game, so again, how relevant is it? I mean, in game 4, first Drake fight was hard won by JDG. It was a little weird, actually, that T1 even took that fight, because like they never had the damage to make the play. The 10-minute dive then that was a threaten, but then JDG like turned onto Faker, collapsed onto Faker, was so good as well. But, you know, I mean, that's more JDG being good than Faker getting caught out. I mean, you could argue Faker should have taken a more passive route, but like you can't expect JDG to just turn from the dive. Like it was really well played from them. I think like the major difference in this series as a whole was like game 1 they managed to make 369 look irrelevant. Game 2 he was the difference maker. He really carried on the Cassante, but you know, the main thing to highlight though is that this is the second series back to back where the enemy jungler has had a bad series against T1, and I was trying to work out when I'm watching, like, is it something T1 are doing, or is it like just the jungler having a bad game? And I think it's really hard to say. But I don't know. In my opinion, it's mostly T1 playing well, exposing mistakes in junglers, especially when they are so good at capitalizing mistakes. Like, I don't really think T1 are forcing the errors. I think they're just really good at highlighting mistakes. And coming off this series, like, going to play Weibo in the final, like, I think it could be an easy 3-0 for T1. The only thing T1 have got to watch for, it sounds a bit silly saying this when I'm not really a big The Shy fan, is The Shy. Like, if The Shy can pop off, or just anyone can pop off alongside him, T1 could actually lose. But like, I genuinely just expect T1 to 3-0 at this point, and I'm not a big T1 fan. So, you know, congrats on winning another Worlds, I guess. Well, I don't know. We'll see. It's been a really good run from them. Really well done from them in general, to be honest, at this tournament. They've beaten some really good teams. Like, when I say they have a good run, they've had a really good run. Like, in Swiss stage, they've beaten Genji. Sorry, they played Genji. They lost to Genji. They've beaten BLG. Okay, they beat the 2NA teams, but, like, they then went on to beat LNG and, and JDG. They've beaten three, in my opinion, three of the top 4 teams that aren't themselves. So, like, you can't take anything away from them. They've not gone the easy route. They've not just beaten who was ahead of them, who's in front of them, who they had to play. They've beaten some top opposition. So, you know, really well done. We will be talking about that was my alarm going off. We will be talking about we will be talking about the final. We will be talking about some Siege stuff as well, because that tournament's going on right now, and we will talk about the format again. We're going to try and be moving to a positive sort of thing, but yeah, we will be talking about that. So see you in the next one. See ya.